And welcome to the Core Connection. I'm Mira Rubin here with you on Enlightened World Network. And today's topic is allowing, and how by allowing things to be as they are, we actually cultivate more presence and more capacity to be responsive to the actual demands of a situation. So, before we get started, let's take a minute or two to just get present. And let's take a deep breath in through your nose and hold it. And imagine clean, crisp oxygen flooding your lungs, flowing into your bloodstream, nourishing your cells, and bringing vital life energy throughout all your body and being. And as you exhale, exhale any tension, any stress, negativity, fatigue. And now let's take another deep breath in through your nose and hold it. This time, imagine brilliant, bright light lighting you up from the inside out, illuminating and electrifying all your electrons, all your molecules, your cells, and brightening up your vital life energy from the inside out. And as you exhale, exhale any remaining tension, stress, negativity, fatigue. And now let's gently press our palms press our palms together and softly, softly, softly rub your fingers against your palms and feel how delicious that sensation is. Bring yourselves present right here, right now. Welcome, welcome, welcome. So, allowing. What is allowing? Does it mean capitulating? No. Does it mean resignation to, like resigning yourself to the way things are? No. What it means is being present, actually, to what's so. And without the resistance to it, without trying to push it away, without trying to deny it or defend against it. When we get to see the way things are, then we get to be able to respond rather than react, to behave accordingly, to respond to whatever's there, whether we like it or not. It then, if we're allowing that things are as they are, it doesn't mean granting permission. It just means recognizing. And the word recognizing is recognizing, right? And cognition is perception and thought. And so when we recognize or we recognize something, we allow ourselves to rethink what that thing might be, rather than the standard notion about recognizing, which might be putting something in a box and labeling it. In this case, we allow ourselves sorry, we allow ourselves to be present to what's there. That's really what allowing in this context is, that we're discussing today. So in making space for things to be the way they are, without all of our reactivity around it, to just be allowing for things to be as they are, then we access a greater capability to interact with things, and potentially to access creative responses to a situation. So, for instance, if someone is hollering at me, I can react to that, I can resist that, I can defend against that, and I could also be present to them almost as an observer, and say and look at, well, this person is freaking out right now. What's going on with them? Like, rather than how dare they talk to me that way, or feeling, there may be times when it's appropriate to feel afraid, or to respond with, you know what? best to get out of here. You know, I'm not saying stand there and take it. I am saying by allowing it to be as it is, we get to see it more clearly. And so maybe we can look at ways in which our lack of allowing makes us not see things so clearly, and results in responses to things that may not be as empowering or powerful as they could be. So we all have triggers, right? We all have history, and as a result of that history, we have triggers that put us in sort of this reactive mode. And it's interesting. I think there are certain words that might ignite us or activate us into our reactivity. There are certain predispositions we might have. So if I were struggling with issues around self-expression, and I'm just trying to think of an example here. I apologize because I can't think of a specific, but when if I'm trying to find my way into self-expression, if somebody says something to me like shush, then perhaps I would react pretty intensely to that, like, how dare you shush me, or whatever. And maybe it's really important in that certain circumstance to be shushed, you know, to be quiet. And it wasn't in the intention wasn't to limit my self-expression, but maybe it was an important moment that quiet was called for. But because I had this reactivity, I wasn't able to see the whole picture, perhaps. And so if I were allowing, what I would be doing, perhaps ideally, is observing the bigger picture rather than reacting. So when we're in a place of presence, when we're not in fight or flight or freeze, or faint, these other options for responses have been added recently that have helped to illuminate that whole dynamic of reaction, you know, like when we're experiencing a shock. But Maggie, I when we're not in when we are in a state of fight or flight, what happens is that literally our focus gets narrowed, and we become we get into a state of high alert, and it is focused, and it is immediate, and it is urgent, and we go into this reactive mode. When we're in a place of presence, we have literally a broader field of vision. And when we have a broader field of vision, we have a greater capacity to be responsive to a situation. So I just want to ask you guys, if anybody's out there, I just want to tell you, I'm not seeing any comments. So if you're there and you want to give me a comment so I know that you're receiving this broadcast, that would be awesome, because periodically we have some challenges with the broadcasting. Sir, there you go, Rosalind. Thank you. I so appreciate that. And Tammy, thank you. I now I know you're here. Rosalind says good morning, accept, align, allow, as Marietta likes to say. I don't know of Marietta. Thank you for sharing that, Rosalind. The barriers go down after acceptance. Beautiful. And good morning, Tammy. Welcome, welcome. So that's really what we're talking about in allowing. It doesn't mean, like when we say accept or we say allow, it seems like we might be giving permission for a certain behavior to persist. Well, that's not really what we're saying. We're saying allow what's there to be there, so that you then have the opportunity to be responding appropriately rather than reacting. And sometimes that means stepping beyond ourselves, stepping beyond our beliefs and limitations, to become a more impartial observer in order to respond appropriately. And in the throes of passion in a moment, that can be very challenging. It can be challenging to separate yourself a bit, to make room for the allowing. I don't know if it's actually separating yourself either. I think I had a really interesting conversation yesterday about being in your head versus being in your heart. And it was a really interesting conversation because the question arose, is it ever a good thing to be in your head? The supposition was that if I'm in my heart, I can't think. Like I can't have logical thought if I'm in my heart. And I don't think that that's true. Like that I couldn't take care of doing a spreadsheet if I were in my heart. And I really don't believe that that's the case. In fact, I think that when we're in our heads, we are disconnected from our heart. And what happens is that the kinds of decisions that we can make based on logic alone without connection can be some pretty heinous decisions, like strategic military type decisions that say, okay, we can afford to lose 20% of our troops in this battle, kind of thing. So, and the thing that permits that kind of thinking is a thinking that is completely disconnected from the humanity of these numbers that are being thrown around, right? The same kind of thinking allows us to believe that it's okay to justify pretty much anything in the making of money. We've all heard the phrase, it's not personal, it's just business, right? To justify some really heinous behavior, some really disconnected, immoral behavior. It's just business. Well, there's we talk a lot about making the invisible visible, and the emperor has no clothes, and all these ideas that we just accept that are ridiculous. And this idea of it's just business is a ridiculous idea. When we look at the consequences of that kind of thinking and what it justifies and what we accept in that kind of context. So, in the allowing of what is, let's see if I can bring this back around. In the allowing of what is, we get to see things, maybe we get to see things more clearly. And to see, well, wait a second, here's the assumption. And as I'm looking at it, not with resignation, but as I'm looking at it as like, this is how this dynamic exists. when I'm able to look at it from that wider vantage point that isn't in reactivity, when I'm able to look at it and say, what is the premise here? And what is that founded on? And does that make any sense? It kind of gives us, in the allowing of what is, it gives us the opportunity to remake things, to reshape things, not to resist necessarily, but to look at this dynamic and say, whoa, how could we possibly have believed that? We were put into kind of this fight or flight or this reactive or this survival mode in such a way that we just accepted that that's how this is and that that's how it has to be. Like there is this acceptance around it without even looking more deeply to see what the dynamic is and what the consequence is and what the alternatives might be, and on beyond that. And so this notion of being present to what is gives us more presence, gives us more capacity to see an appropriate response, to see beyond the popular assumptions, to see beyond the group hypnosis that we're subject to. There's so many things that we just accept, and I think it's because we don't pay attention to what's there, what's so, like. And it's interesting that in this conversation about allowing, I'm really looking at it as a tool, the dynamic of allowing as a tool to move into action that might shift whatever that is. So we're not talking about just acceptance. We're not talking about resignation, but we are talking about presence, like being present to what's there in the broader scheme of things, in the broader scope. And that gives us access to ways in which we might be able to identify things that need shifting. So how about allowing as a catalyst for change? So I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in the context of the core connection work I do, because that's really the foundation of the work. So the way the core connection work works, and the reason I'm talking about this is because I'm seeing it as a metaphor for how we can really shift things in the world as well. So the way that the work works is that we observe. So I'll start a session by asking, after we determine what we're working on, I'll ask the person, so what's the first thing that comes to mind? And that's where we interact with the brilliance of the other than conscious mind, right? So what's the first thing that comes to mind? Whatever it is, we say, okay, so what do you notice about that? And the idea here is that there is observation occurring without judgment. So there's just observing. What do you notice? And then touching in with the body to say, and are there any emotions that are arising in response to that? And then when there's an emotion that's identified, so then we look at, okay, so where is that in your body? And what does it feel like? Where is it in your body? And then we go back to the thing that we observed originally, and we observe it some more. So now what do you notice? What's different? And the magic here is that as we go back and forth in these, what do you notice? What does it feel like? What's happening with the feeling in your body? And what do you feel now? And is it the same feeling, etc.? As we go back and forth with these observations, what happens is that the thing that we were observing shifts. It just shifts. There's no action being taken to shift it. What is being, the action is observing and allowing it to be as it is. And by observing it and recognizing the interaction of the observation and the response, and feeling that response in the body, it shifts of its own. It may take a little bit. Good morning, Christina. Welcome. So good to have you here with us. We're talking about allowing. And right now I'm talking about it in the context of the core connection work that I have developed and that I do with my clients. And it's based on non-judgmental observation. It's based on allowing what is to be there, and observing it, noticing it, and not judging it, just observing it and noticing it. And in that noticing, in that observation, what happens is that the thing shifts. And so, we've talked about the emperor has no clothes and calling it out and saying, hey, the emperor has no clothes. And, like by observing these things, by recognizing some of the dynamics that are at play in our culture, some of the crazy norms that we have adopted, like really crazy, when we start observing them, when we start noticing them, they have to shift because they're intolerable. When we recognize some of the craziness that we've accepted, then all of a sudden there's the energy of awareness starts to shift those very things and to shift those dynamics. The more awareness there is, there's action that starts to be taken. But my belief, and again, whenever I talk about my beliefs or I give my perspective, please know I'm not saying this is the truth. I'm saying this is the way that this is my hypothesis for the moment. And I endeavor to hold these hypotheses with open hand. In other words, to leave room for evolution and growth and new knowledge. So I'm not trying to be dogmatic here. However, that said, my operating hypothesis here is that that education and awareness is the most important catalyst for change. And as we practice this allowing by observing, I guess it's really observation to a great degree as well, non-judgmental observation, we get to look at, wow, look at this dynamic, look at what the consequences are, look at what else might be possible. When we have this broader view, we have the ability to see possibilities and options that go beyond the thought form, shall we say, the thought form that is operative, that we've kind of been complicit in just by not even noticing. And you know, when we don't notice, then we kind of are complicit. When we don't pay attention, we're enabling something. When we can allow what's there to be there in our presence of view, then we can look at what an appropriate response is. And that's how we can move into action. So in this conversation, when we talk about activism, we often talk about fighting this and resisting that. And I think that there's a flaw in that approach, or that languaging, in that what we resist truly does persist. Like, by the very act of resisting it, we are affirming it, if that makes any sense. We've had that conversation a while back, but by resisting something, we are affirming it in many ways. By fighting something, if I'm fighting pollution, for example, in that language, I'm reaffirming pollution. If I am seeing actions that I can take that shift the dynamic that results in pollution, that's not resistance, that's response. And maybe this is a linguistic argument. It may be, but I think that the frequency of that the energy of it is different. And I think the energy of creating a positive solution is different than fighting the thing that we're trying to shift. So that's kind of where the allowance idea comes in. When we resist something, I already said it, but I think that by resisting something, we're affirming it in a way. And there may be other ways. Like, if you've tried to resist a temptation, doesn't the temptation get stronger? You know, you can understand that from that perspective. So we're talking about allowing, and allowing being part of a practice of presence. And by being present, we then facilitate our ability to be responsive rather than reactive. So hopefully that makes some sense, and maybe you can find places in your life where there's resistance, and what happens if you allow yourself to release that resistance and presence yourself to maybe the bigger picture of what's there. And in perceiving the bigger picture, possibilities arise that may not have otherwise been visible. So on that note, I'm going to call it a wrap for this morning. And I just am so grateful always to have you here and to be sharing this time with you and having these conversations together. So with much gratitude, I'm Mira Rubin. This is the Core Connection, and Maggie and I go live each weekday morning here on the Enlightened World Network Facebook page at 9 a.m. Eastern. And please check out the other awesome programming on Enlightened World Network. It is such a pleasure and privilege to be here with you. Thank you. And